T.S. Eliot's essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, is one of his most famous works. Written in 1919, it discusses the relationship between a poet and the past, and how poetry should be created. Eliot challenges common ideas about poetry, particularly those held by the Romantics, and offers a new way of thinking about the role of tradition in the poet's talent. Let's break down the essay and understand its key ideas. Eliot starts by explaining what he means by tradition. For many people, tradition is something old, something from the past that you simply accept, but Eliot sees tradition as much more than that. He believes that tradition is not just about copying the works of past poets or repeating their ideas. Instead, tradition is alive and active. According to Eliot, when a poet writes, they are not working in isolation. They are part of a long line of writers who have come before them. A good poet, he argues, must understand and study the works of past poets and writers. They must know how literature has evolved over time, but they should not just imitate the past. Instead, they should absorb and build on it. This makes the poet part of a larger tradition that is constantly changing and growing. When a new work is created, it affects how we view past works, and in turn, the past influences how we understand the present. One of the key ideas in Eliot's essay is the historical sense. He says that great poets have this sense, meaning they understand that the past and the present are connected. A poet with a historical sense does not see the past as dead or irrelevant. Instead, they see it as something that is constantly shaping and reshaping the present. Eliot explains that when a new work of art is created, it doesn't just add something new to the world, it also changes the way we look at older works. For example, a modern poet might write something that makes us see Shakespeare or Milton in a new light. This shows that literature is always evolving, and the relationship between past and present is never static. The past and the present are always in conversation with each other. Eliot then moves on to discuss the role of the poet in creating poetry. He disagrees with the idea that poetry should be a direct expression of the poet's personal feelings and emotions, which was a popular view among the Romantics. Instead, he argues for what he calls the impersonal theory of poetry. According to Eliot, a good poet should not focus on expressing their own personal emotions in their poetry. Instead, the poet should aim to create something more universal, something that can be understood and felt by many different people. He believes that poetry is more about the art itself than the person who creates it. Eliot compares the poet to a catalyst in a chemical reaction. Just as a catalyst helps a chemical reaction happen without being changed itself, the poet helps to create poetry, but should remain separate from the emotions expressed in the poem. In other words, the poet's personal feelings should not dominate the poem. Instead, the poet should use technique, skill, and knowledge of tradition to create something that stands on its own, apart from the poet's personal life. Eliot sees the poet as a medium, or a channel, through which emotions and experiences pass. The poet's job is not to directly pour out their own emotions, but to find ways to transform personal feelings into something more objective and universal. This means that the poet should strive to remove their personal ego from the work and focus on creating art that speaks to broader human experiences. This doesn't mean that the poet has no feelings or experiences. In fact, Eliot acknowledges that personal emotions are an important part of the creative process. However, he believes that the best poetry comes from a process of refining and transforming those emotions so they become something that others can connect with on a deeper level. Eliot's essay is not just about how poets should write. It also offers a new approach to literary criticism. He believes that when we read or analyze poetry, we should not focus too much on the poet's personal life or emotions. Instead, we should focus on the work itself, how it fits into the larger tradition of literature and how well it achieves its artistic goals. Eliot's emphasis on the impersonal nature of poetry suggests that critics should evaluate poems based on their craft, structure, and meaning, rather than on how much they reflect the poet's personal feelings. This shifts the focus from the poet as an individual to the poem as a work of art. T.S. Eliot's Tradition and the Individual Talent offers a fresh way of thinking about poetry and its creation. He argues that poetry should be rooted in tradition, with poets drawing from the past to create something new and meaningful. At the same time, he emphasizes the importance of making poetry impersonal, focusing on universal emotions, rather than personal expression. Eliot's ideas about the historical sense, the objective correlative, and the role of the poet as a medium have had a profound impact on literary criticism and modern poetry. His essay encourages poets and readers alike to see poetry as a living, evolving art form that is shaped by both tradition and individual creativity. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to read the text analysis of this video, then please check out the description below.